Nearly 1,000 Aboriginal delegates from all across Canada are gathering in Moncton for the annual general meeting of the Assembly of First Nations. This is the first AGM since Canada voted yes in support of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Sean Atleo is the National Chief of the AFN and joins me now from Moncton. Sean Atleo, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This endorsement by Canada did not come at first. Can you explain a bit about the reversal?
Well, there wasn't a real clear understanding why they didn't support the declaration in the beginning, but I and many others were encouraging the government and the Prime Minister that it would be really important to join the global family and endorse the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and pleased that they did so. When I've spoken to the Prime Minister, encouraged him not only to endorse it, but in fact to move forward in working with First Nations to implement the over 40 articles, which are really critical because they articulate areas like education, that First Nations should be involved in designing an education system that works for First Nations. And so that's an area that stands out as an example because education is a national priority for First Nations, and I'm also pleased that the federal government joins us in identifying the support of our young people for their success in education.
Can you go further in giving concrete examples of how the declaration might have an impact on Aboriginal communities, like communities in New Brunswick?
Well, first of all, in New Brunswick, like elsewhere, First Nations have, through the declaration, the recognition that they have the right to free, prior, and informed consent. So in the area of energy development, First Nations must be involved early and often, and must have an appropriate and meaningful say over what happens in their territories. Well, this has a significant impact and, in my view, real potential for First Nations to become, as they are increasingly, real players in economic development. In fact, there's over $300 billion in major resource projects across Canada where First Nations will have a significant say. We also know that if we do the work needed in the area of education and we close the gap there, as well as with the labour market, that this could constitute over $400 billion in additional revenue to the Canadian economy and savings to government expenditures to the tune of around $115 billion. Because our population is so youthful, we're talking about real significant potential, and strong First Nations means a stronger Canada.
And so how much is this taking up your agenda at this meeting in Moncton?
A significant portion. There's a joint action plan that the federal government has agreed to, which includes the implementation of treaties, and having our meeting here in New Brunswick and Moncton is so significant for us. The original treaties really that formed this country were forged here 268 years ago. And treaties belong not only to First Nations, but to all people of New Brunswick and all people of Canada. And it's really, the theme here is about in the spirit of peace and friendship. It's the idea that we can live together in mutual respect, recognition, and harmony, and that, really First Nations, we're looking for support to help lift ourselves out of poverty and support our young people to overcome the gaps that have really arisen, anywhere from $2,000 to $7,000 less per First Nations child in First Nations schools as opposed to the rest of Canada. The outgoing Auditor General said conditions are still, they're shocking, they're completely unacceptable, and the only way forward is for First Nations to work with government. And so we're going to talk about this joint action plan, and we're certainly going to be testing the sincerity of the federal government to work with us to overcome these appalling conditions.
Chief Sean Atleo, I do appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me.